Dear learners, welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this session, we shall learn natural hazards and disasters. As you all know, our planet Earth is the only planet that has life. Throughout the geological history, the Earth processes have been operating. The planet is evolving, it is a dynamic system, and we have both internal and external processes that are occurring. So this gives rise to a number of hazardous events, and they become hazardous only when they affect life and property. For example, there may be earthquakes, there may be volcanoes, which are internal processes, and you could also have the external processes, for example, floods or cyclones, landslides. So all these are occurring continuously in nature, and human beings also benefit directly from this. For example, volcanism renews the soil, we get new rock material. So these are some advantages also of these natural processes that are occurring. In order to have a better understanding of these hazards and in order to prepare ourselves for the disaster mitigation, preparedness and response, let us now learn about some of the natural hazards and disasters and the objectives of this unit. The objectives are, after reading this chapter, you should be able to define the terms natural hazards and disaster, explain the different types of natural hazards and their effects, and also learn what are the anthropogenic or human based hazards. List the different measures for the hazard mitigation. So these are the main objectives. Now mainly, if we have to see hazards, they originate from the interplay of the physical, biological and the social systems. India itself as a subcontinent, it is prone to a number of natural hazards, for example earthquakes, the floods, cyclones and droughts. Our planet, as I told, is an ever dynamic evolving system, and it has complex interactions with both the internal and the external processes. The internal processes include the earthquakes, the volcanic activities, and the external processes include the floods, the hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts and so on. Now, how about the energy source? The energy source for the internal processes, that is from the radioactivity and radioactive energy. The source for the internal mechanisms, for the external mechanisms, is from the solar energy or from the sun. Natural hazards can be extreme events, and this can also lead to further certain other disasters which could be hazardous, that is also called as the secondary or the tertiary hazards. For example, earthquakes, when they occur, which is a primary hazard, this can also result in landslides, which can result in the destruction of buildings and hazard to the property, life and property. This in turn can also contaminate the water resource in an area and bring about cholera or some other waterborne diseases. An example is that which occurred in the Haiti earthquake in 2010. Let us now define what a hazard is and how is it different from a disaster. Hazard, as defined by Burton et al. In 1978, the elements of the physical environment harmful to man and are caused by forces extraneous to him. A hazard has a potential to cause harm to people, human activity, property and the environment. What do you mean by disaster? Realization of the hazard leads to a disaster. A natural hazard, this is a hazard event that causes a very large number of fatalities and damage to property. It can be defined as a natural disaster. So now we have seen the three definitions of the natural hazards and disaster. How can we classify natural hazards? The natural hazards can be classified as geological, hydrological, meteorological and also biological hazards. Geological hazard, as the name indicates, these occur due to the earth processes. For example, earthquakes, volcanic activities, landslides, avalanches, subsidence. The earthquakes release maximum amount of energy in a short span of time. So earthquakes can last from a few seconds to a few minutes, and the longer the number of minutes, the higher the earthquake will be. and this can cause large scale of loss in life and property. So, in this photo you can see before and after the Nepal or the Kathmandu earthquake what have been the devastating effects, and of course you also see the volcanic activities, how this occurs in nature. Meteorological, these are weather based or weather induced phenomena. They include the cyclones, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, lightning thunderstorms, heavy rain and flooding, heat waves and bushfires. Hydrological. So, these days we are also seeing that India, either we have no floods, we have no rains, or we have a lot of floods at one point of time. So, it is a flooding event where a certain place is damaged with high levels of water due to the rains. So, this is triggered by the hydrological extreme event phenomena. Floods, droughts, the mudslides, tsunamis, they can occur frequently and they can damage life and property. This photo shows the floods that occurred in 2015, that is the Chennai floods. You can see knee deep and the hip deep amount of water, and how the people are finding it very difficult to go from one place to another. It also entered the buildings and the institutions. So, floods can also cause devastating effects. Now, the next is biological hazards. So, as the name indicates, these are caused by biological agents. They can also be infectious agents. And the disease, that is the bubonic plague, in the 1300s, this killed 100 million people, and also in 1918 we had the Spanish flu pandemic, which also was a virus or an influenza that spread to a number of people, killing number of the people. So, even antibiotics and those drugs were not available at that time, and this was also a devastating hazard. Epidemic, occurrence of an illness, health catastrophe that affect large number of people, and this is normally high after a natural disaster. There can be poor environmental conditions, water contamination, breeding of the disease vectors. All this occurs when a hazard has occurred. Dengue, Asian flu or the avian flu, swine flu, which is caused from the pigs, the cholera, chikungunya, which is also caused by mosquitoes, and the bubonic plague. All these are the biological hazards which can cause a lot of health effects to the human beings. Secondary hazards, these are caused as a result of the primary hazard. So, for example, if the primary hazard is an earthquake, a dam failure or building collapse can be a secondary hazard. And even ruptured power and water lines, landslides, tsunami, which are underwater generated earthquakes, can also be a secondary hazard as a result of the earthquake. Chronic hazard, these are a group of hazards that do not originate from one event. They occur due to continuous hazardous conditions, and such as pollution, toxic contaminations of soil that accumulate over time, and so on. Now, the natural hazards can be both. It could be a rapid hazard and it could also be a slow onset hazard. The rapid onset are the earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions, severe thunderstorms. Slow onset hazards, which occur slowly over a period of time, these can be categorized as the droughts and the disease epidemics. Spatial dispersion, the dispersion pattern of a hazard over a geographical area where the hazard can occur. So, this is defined as spatial distribution where the hazard can occur. Hazard landscape is nothing but a landscape of numerous hazards used in reference to a specific region. Now, each hazard has a different space and time characteristic. So, if we see over here in this table, from earthquakes to cyclones, the impact time for everything could be somewhere, it could be a few seconds, in some places it could be few minutes, it could even take certain time, in also certain hours. For example, floods or cyclones can even last up to certain hours. The spatial extent also, whether it can the amount or the space, the number of square kilometers that it can be affected also varies for a different hazard, and it has different space and time characteristic. Disaster classification, as we have seen now, it can be natural disasters, and in the natural disasters we have the weather related, geophysical, drought and pandemic. In the human generated or anthropogenic disasters, we have two categories, that is a non-intentional hazard and also intentional hazards. In non-intentional, that is it could be due to technological faulty operation of certain systems, that which occurred in the Bhopal gas tragedy, or which occurred in the Chernobyl disaster, which occurred in Russia in Ukraine in 1986 April. Now, intentional could be mass violence, that which could be used for terrorism purpose. It is also referred to as bioterrorism. We had this anthrax letters, or these biological infectious agents that were used as terror agents, and also in the World War I and the some of the wars, the biological agents were used to destroy the army and the enemies. So, the soldiers were also affected by giving them infected blankets with the biological infectious agents. So, that could be for intentional reasons or mass violence. This can result in complex emergencies. Man-made hazards. In this, we have the technological hazards, which is exposure to hazardous substances, chemical disasters and fires. The worst chemical disasters that occurred in India is the Bhopal gas tragedy, which occurred on the 3rd of December 1984 due to a faulty shutting down of this operation of the reactor, and a number of people were injured, and very late they received the compensation also due to this chemical disaster. Toxic substances, that which occurred in Vidya-mitra in Japan, where the one of the company this dumped the inorganic mercury near the Vidya-mitra Bay in Japan. That is why the name is also called as the Vidya-mitra disease. So, here the inorganic mercury was transformed into organic methyl mercury by the fishes that were in the bay, and this occurred due to organic methylation process by anaerobic bacteria that were thriving in these waters. Now, during the 1950s and 60s, when scientists went to examine and see the lethargic condition of the fishes in the bay, then they found out that the inorganic mercury was converted to the organic mercury, and the fishes had become lethargic due to this. When human beings consumed these fishes, then they had this strange neurological disorder, which wherein their hands and legs and everything became paralytic. There was numbness of the hands and feet, there were tingling sensations. So, all this was referred to as the Vidya-mitra disease. Then also there are certain biological diseases which could be spread due to infectious agents. Now, fires can also be there, burning, LPG, short circuit in certain electrical wiring, forest fires. So, all this can be categorized as CBRN, or chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear disasters. Biological definition, if we have to define them, they are the devastating effects that may be caused by biological agents or their toxic products that can kill, incapacitate people, livestock and plants. Plague, then the typhus, smallpox, all this has caused high mortality during very early days. Malaria, dengue, yellow fever have debilitated the populations. Disasters also occurred when the environmental factors were conducive. Black death occurred when the conditions were favorable for the increase in the number of rats. Also, post the World War I, movement of the population led to the spread of the Spanish influenza virus. Now, if we have to take an example, let us take forest fires. So, the environmental, for example, it may be largely related to climatic conditions, the temperature, the wind speed, the level of moisture in the soil, atmosphere, duration of dry spells, also friction of the trees, for example, bamboo trees that are swaying in the air due to high wind and velocity, also friction of certain stones that can set off sparks in the ground, that is in the forest ground. All this can light up the matter, that is a material, the dry leaf litter matter on the forest ground, and it can result in forest fires. So, these are natural forest fires that occur. Now, they can also be due to the human activity, which could be intentional and also unintentional, for example, clearing of the land for certain other construction purposes or agricultural purposes. The anthropogenic causes mainly are the people who enter the forest to graze their cattle, they collect the fuel wood, the timber or minus forest produce. 90% of the forest fires in India are man-made. So, this occurs due to the shifting cultivation, that is the slash and burn practice also. They grow their plants or the agricultural produce in one region, and then there is shifting cultivation. After that, they burn that entire ground or the land, and then they move on to another area. Also, the villagers, to ward off certain wild animals, they also set off the fire in the forest. And certain fires are lit recreational. People go for the picnic or recreation purposes to enjoy themselves. So there also they light the bonfire, etc. And this can also accidentally result in the forest fires. And the visitors also who accidentally they enter the forest, they can discard the cigarette butts and cigarette stubs. This can also sometimes get into accidentally, that can become a forest fire. So these are some of the anthropogenic causes of forest fires. So what are the effects of these forest fires? The major cause is forest degradation, of course. As you know, forest is a natural resource and we benefit directly by getting so many products from the forest. For example, the medicine that is used to treat the blood pressure, that is digitalis purpurea. So this medicine is got from the plant digitalis purpurea for treating blood pressure. The same way for treating cancer, for treating other problems, also for the hair problems, we use arnica which is produced from the forest. Also all our spices, the tea, the coffee, the caffeine, cocoa, all this, the cashew nuts, the pepper, all this are the forest produced. So the loss of the forest cover, timber, resources and biodiversity, which is also going to lead to extinction of a number of the biological diversity and resources. This would lead to adverse ecological, economic and social impacts. There can be a number of health problems leading to diseases, also loss of livelihood for tribal people, because tribal people have and the local people have a lot of knowledge about each and every plant. They can also have the indigenous cultivars of certain varieties of the rice or certain varieties, the coal people for example, ethno cultivars of different varieties of the mangoes. So they can have and these can have a higher level of the genetic composition which are much healthier, which can have low glycemic index. So these are all some indigenous things that the local people know, and therefore participatory approach also to management of these resources is important. The local people have to be involved along in the decision making with the NGOs, with the government for proper management of these resources. Also the long term effect would be global warming, the ozone layer depletion, loss of the carbon sink and also increase in the percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The effects of the hazards, they can be primary, secondary and tertiary effects. Primary is due to the process itself, building collapse as a result of earthquake. Secondary, because the primary event triggers the secondary event to occur. Tertiary, these are long term effects set off due to the primary events, crop failure due to volcanic eruption and severe loss of habitats due to the severe floods. Now, so long we have been discussing about the natural hazards and what are the effects that they cause, and also some anthropogenic hazards. So, do these natural hazards have some service functions to mankind? Yes, they do. What are they? Volcanism, for example, this renews the soil, the fertility of the soil is renewed. Also, they also give the hydrosphere and the atmosphere more matter to this is added. In rivers, the water flow on the river banks, if you see the flood plains, they have the nutrient soils. Therefore, the physical processes are linked to the biological environment and they produce the varied landscapes. Disturbances from the natural processes, the water availability, soil fertility, so all this can be enhanced due to the natural hazards. Vulnerability, this again depends on a number of factors. So, this could be proximity to a possible hazardous event, how near it is to that hazardous event. The population density is important, the construction styles, the building code, the understanding and awareness of the nature of hazard, and is there any disaster preparedness and response mechanism. Early warning systems, how well the people are informed about the disaster, all these are some important factors. Human intervention, this can cause the frequency, increase the frequency of the natural hazards. For example, when the toe of a landslide is removed, then you all know what could possibly happen. So, when this is removed, then there could be disaster. This is human induced. The same way the destruction of the coral reef. You know, the coral reef is a good resource of biological diversity, and many of it is now we are losing this biological diversity. They are cradles and hotspots of diversity. So, they can also cause disturbances to the natural ecosystem. Next is assessing the hazards. Hazard evaluation or hazard analysis, referred to as UNDRO by 1991. So, this is a process of estimating the probabilities of the occurrence of a disaster of a given magnitude within a specified period of time. The probability of a hazard occurrence differs from place to place. Mapping also improves to network among the people between the planners and the decision makers, so that they can take an effective decision. Answering the different hazardous processes that have occurred in the past, the magnitude, the frequency, the socio-economic impacts of the past hazardous event. So, all this involves the analysis of the locations, the buildings and the highways that are subject to hazards. There have been national and international attention for the hazard mitigation processes. 1990s, this decade 1990 to 1999 was referred to as the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction by the United Nations. The primary goal is to reduce the loss of life, property and the socio-economic disruptions that are caused due to these natural disasters. So, the UN member states they advised these states to establish the national platforms to facilitate the disaster risk reduction and to implement the policies. Later on, the Yokohama conference that was held in 1994, this focused the need for shift in strategy for disaster mitigation, disaster prevention, preparedness and relief, which are fundamental to sustainable development policies. In India, this year was 1990 to 99 was declared as the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction by the UN, and the government of India in the MHRD in its 5th year plan, they emphasized the need for integrating disaster management in the existing education system also in the Indian curriculum. So, this was an important step that was taken. Now, we have this NDMA or the National Disaster Management Authority in our country with the objective of providing effective management for the disasters. This Disaster Management Act in 2005 was enacted on 26th of December 2005. The Act mandates the formation of a national apex body, the NDMA, with the Prime Minister of India as a chairperson, creation of the SDMAs and the coordination and monitoring of these activities at district and local levels through the creation of district and local level disaster management authorities. So, now dear learners, coming to the summary, we have learnt about the natural hazards, the disasters, how they have been operating throughout in the geological history and how we also benefit directly from the natural hazards. So, we can get some fertile soil and also we have benefited from these processes. There we have also learnt about some of the anthropogenic activities, for example, the CBRN, chemical, biological, the radiation and the nuclear effects and the devastating effects the biological agents also have, forest fires which also could be intentional or non-intentional, and these effects also which have on our environment and the human beings. So, in order to develop a better understanding for the natural hazards and these processes that are operating in nature, we have learnt about the disaster management processes, the NDMA or the Disaster Management Authority that has been set up in our country, their mandate and how this helps to understand the past by understanding, for example, if a hazard is occurring, then we have the people, the scientists who go and analyze the event. There can also be certain precursor events which help to analyze them further. So, understanding the past is a present to the key that was put forth by Hutton, and this way the natural hazards and disasters could be handled in a better way for preparedness and response. Thank you.